Okay, now we finish with our second reading, which comes from the first letter of St. Peter, chapter 3, verses 15 through 18. Beloved, sanctify Christ as Lord in your hearts. Always be ready to give an explanation to anyone who asks you for a reason for your hope, but do it with gentleness and reverence, keeping your conscience clear, so that when you are maligned, those who defame your good conduct in Christ may themselves be put to shame. For it is better to suffer for doing good, if that be the will of God, than for doing evil. For Christ also suffered for sins once, the righteous for the sake of the unrighteous, that he might lead you to God. Put to death in the flesh, he was brought to life in the Spirit. Okay, so just a reminder, Peter is writing to a group of Christians who are being persecuted. I think I mentioned this at like 5 or 6 times in the letter. He mentions this whole theme of suffering, persecution for the sake of Christ. And here he clearly is like, it is better to suffer for doing good, if that be the will of God, than for doing evil. So he's just like, okay, don't turn sour over this entire thing. Don't turn evil over this entire thing, but remain steadfast in the faith. So sanctify. Another word is to reverence. Reverence Christ. Sanctify Christ as Lord in your hearts. And that's it's maybe an abstract idea, but I think it's worth our thought. It's worth our consideration. It's like, what does that look like to sanctify Christ in my heart? Actually, like this is one of those things that you could ask any Christian, like, do you have Christ in your heart? And I think a lot of people would say yes. Okay, but what does that mean to sanctify Christ in your heart, or to reverence Christ in your heart? The whole thing of the gospel, actually, when Jesus says you know him because he remains with you and will be in you, the whole thing of the gospel is he's with the church, but he's also with us personally. And so he lives inside of us. And so too does the Father, and so too does the Son. And so like Jesus is within us. And so it's like, okay, am I reverencing him? Am I honoring his presence there by maybe retreating into my little baptized soul on a daily basis? Am I acknowledging that I take him with me everywhere that I go? Sanctify Christ in your hearts. Always be ready to give an explanation to anyone who asks you for a reason for your hope. An explanation, the word is apologia. Apologia, it's where we get the word apologetics. So we think of apology as like I'm saying that I'm sorry and trying to maybe give a reason for my bad behavior, but and that's part of the reason, or part of the explanation, or part of the definition of apology. But another part of the definition of apology is just simply a reasoned defense. So the word apologetics is a word that means like I'm able to explain the faith to people. I'm able to explain to people why I believe what I believe about Jesus, about his church. This is something that, you run into a lot of people who say like, oh, I'd love to teach faith formation, but I don't know all the answers. Or I'd love to try to explain the faith to people, but I don't know all the answers. And I can appreciate that, even while I would still say, yeah, but you could learn, or you could grow, or you don't have to know all the answers. And that's absolutely true. But it is also true that we could grow in our understanding of like, why am I Catholic? Why do I believe in Jesus? Is there a reasoned definition or explanation for why Christians believe that Jesus died and rose again? And of course, we have the Gospels, but like, are there other reasons for that? Or why do we believe that the Catholic Church is the church that Jesus established? Why do we believe in the Eucharist? Why do we believe in this or that? So like Peter's saying, always be ready to give an explanation to anyone who asks you for a reason for your hope. Why are you so confident in the future? Someone might ask you. And that's ultimately what he's getting at. Like, what is the reason for your hope of like, yes, you're suffering persecution, but you're able to look forward with confidence into the future. Why is that? So this is what Peter is exhorting these people who are suffering for their faith. And presumably he's saying you're suffering, but you're also doing it in a confident kind of way, knowing that this isn't all that there is, but there's more. So he's like, people are going to ask you about that. And so be ready to give an explanation when they ask you, like, why are you so hopeful? Why are you so confident in the future? What's that about? But then he says, but do it with gentleness and reverence, keeping your conscience clear. So again, this is getting at like, don't be biting, don't be sarcastic. Keep your conscience clear. Do it with self-composure, with self-control, of not being overly antagonistic toward people. And this is actually really hard. For some people, I know it can be for me, is that I might have a tendency to be biting in my explanation of the faith. Or I might have a tendency to be sarcastic sometimes with people if I notice that they're particularly antagonistic toward me. So I think this is part of the reason that Peter is reminding them of this, is that he might know the temptation himself. We know from the Gospels that he can be a little bit impulsive sometimes, and so he himself might also struggle with composure, with gentleness, with reverence, keeping a clear conscience. Anyway, so that when you are maligned, those who defame your good conduct in Christ may themselves be put to shame. In other words, he's like, imagine a world where these people who are trying to shame you by saying that, oh, you're a hypocrite, you're not a real Christian, or those Christians, like they're really bad people, and the people listening to them can be like, yeah, but no, they're not. They're actually really good people. They're gentle, they're reverent, they're upright in their conduct. So those people who are trying to defame you will actually be put to shame, actually. So again, it's getting back to the whole thing of like, talk the talk, but also walk the walk. Live the gospel that you say that you believe in. In other words, getting back to what Jesus is saying, if you love me, you will keep my commandments. Whoever has my commandments and observes them is the one who loves me. The one who bears authentic witness, integrated witness to Christ, that's the one who truly does love him. And in doing that, it's going to bring our opponents to shame. Without even us intentionally trying to bring them to shame, it's just going to bring them to shame because they're going to look for a way to attack us and they're not going to have anything. Because if we're truly living the gospel, we will be people of generosity, we'll be people of selflessness, we'll be people of consideration, we'll be people of like authentic faith and hope and confidence in the future. We'll be all the things really that Christians are meant to be in an ideal world, because we'll be striving to live in that ideal world. Again, getting back to the whole reality of like, I know that struggle is real. I know that sin is real. I have to go to confession just like anyone else has to go to confession. But nonetheless, if we're striving to live that kind of way, Peter is saying that our opponents will be put to shame, which will be an incredible thing. So then he says, for it is better to suffer for doing good, if that be the will of God, than for doing evil. Sometimes, again, getting back to God's providence, sometimes he allows evil things to happen to good people. For what purpose? We don't always know. But we know from our first reading that the purpose there was so that the mission of the gospel could expand and reach other parts of the world. So like he allows his community to suffer persecution, even death for some of them. And yet, from that place, the missionary activity of the church increases and goes out further. God's providence can do incredible things like that if we allow it to be the case, instead of turning sour or sarcastic or biting. For Christ also suffered for sins once. Like Jesus did this. He suffered for sins, the righteous, for the sake of the unrighteous. Jesus was the perfect one. If anyone had a claim to innocence, if anyone had a claim to respond with anger to the persecution against him, it was Jesus. And yet he suffered, the righteous for the sake of the unrighteous, so that what? So that he might lead you to God. You yourself were brought to God because Jesus was willing to suffer for doing good. That's a really interesting thing to think about. What if he was unwilling to suffer for doing good? Well, you might not have been brought to God. That's amazing. But because he was willing to do so, you were brought to God. So imagine then, Peter is saying, imagine a world where you're willing to suffer for the sake of doing good. Who might be brought to God because of that? You could imagine a world where people are brought to the Lord because of our sacrifice, participating in the sacrifice of Jesus. Put to death in the flesh, he was brought to life in the spirit. So he's the model righteous sufferer. He's the model of that. And so for us, if we're ever finding ourselves being persecuted or just suffering in any way, to look to Christ, to see that he doesn't complain, to see that he doesn't grumble against God. Yes, he asks in the garden, like, if it's possible, let this cup pass me by, but ultimately he surrenders. He's like, yeah, but not my will, let your will be done. And through all of that, the salvation of the world is brought into existence, is brought into reality. What a gift, including your own salvation and mine. I'm grateful for that. And maybe that can spur us on, as Peter is trying to spur us on. It can spur us on to be willing to say, okay, I'm willing to suffer for whatever you want to offer to me, Lord. Whatever is your will, I'm willing to follow after you, because I believe that you are the Lord, the one who has come into the world to bring us to the Father. Really good. Okay, there we go. I hope and pray this was a helpful Bible study for you this week, and I will look forward to seeing you next week. Peace.